it seems as though even I really appreciate the cosmic perspective of having an n that's greater than 1 being really valuable here in terms of, oh, let's analyze other secretions of life on celestial bodies orbiting stars that then gain self-awareness and pierce the veil and understand their metaphysics, and then see if it correlates with ours. It's good. That's solid. That's really valuable. It is. And at the same time, in a sense, we are a micro version of that, where you have all of these little cultures that have blossomed across the planet that are all in what appears to be pointing towards the same mountain top. And even the word, in the sense, the words themselves are like God or Tao or Brahman, or even the universal wave function. Like, to a certain extent, it seems to be a source or infinity or eternity. As much as these word clouds have different descriptors around these individual words, the word clouds also have a tremendous amount of overlap and similarity, and that seems to be the mountain top that it is pointing towards. And I do agree that there is this a deep style of what's called self-inquiry or self-abiding to what is thought of as the witness or the observer or the I am or the self, which is in a sense the eye of God that we share, that is being colored by different experience. And that's sort of what much of the perennial wisdom points towards. And yet it also points towards things like this being a appearance, this being a dream, this being an illusion, and that the physicalism, the form, as quantum mechanics is sharing with us now, all is no thing, all is energy. And so it's becoming more and more clear that what we do at night, a third of our lives, we spend a chunk of that dreaming, we simulate a reality, take the first person perspective into it. Jason, for a period of time, becomes Paul in the streets of London in this dream, and he's having some tea, enjoying his time there, and then all of a sudden you wake up and you wonder, well, that wasn't real. That was a dream. And so this simultaneously, whether it's God, source, infinity, eternity, the Tao, Brahman, what have you, as an absolute, being a dreamt creation design and immersion into it, and coloring that awareness or consciousness with experience.
Sure.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I think the refraction of the human personality into the various personas that we assume in dream states and that, we interact with in dream states could be a metaphor for how our reality is structured. I mean, it could be that, it's almost cliche at this point, we're all part of God's dream, we're all avatars of some kind of a divine consciousness. And, our world does not have an ontological status that's fundamentally different from that of a dream. Okay, that it's a kind of intersubjective dream state, like in the film Inception, for example. And, I agree with you. It's a fascinating phenomenon to see how your consciousness individuates itself and gives life to these different personas in the dream state, right? Especially if you've ever had the experience, as I have, of having the same dream continue serially on multiple nights, where it's almost like you're going into an alternate reality. And, there are these personalities there that seem to have a life of their own, right? And yet they're your own psyche, sort of refracting itself in various ways. Sure. I mean, that could be an analogy for how reality as a whole, whatever reality, capital R is, has, as the cosmos as a whole functions. That's possible. Again, we don't know. Something that I wanted to say in response to your remarks a little while back about the mind of God, within ourselves. In other words, the microcosm that is reflecting the macrocosm, right? The God within us, as it were, right? I'll throw this out there, and we can unpack it if you want to. If not, we could just leave it out there. But I would be so bold as to claim that the only way that we are a microcosm of some kind of macrocosmic consciousness is if there is a convergent evolution of consciousness in the cosmos, and some kind of super consciousness from the future is engaged in a dynamic relationship with us. To me, that's the only empirically sensible way to frame the claim that our minds are a microcosm of some kind of macrocosm. But here's the problem. If that's how you want to characterize the relationship between the microcosm and the macrocosm, the last thing that God wants is perennialism. Because God is, quote, God, unquote, is a super consciousness at the end of history, which is running out of a future. Okay? And so what God needs from us is a broadening of the field of potential experience. So God would want further differentiation and increasing complexity. And therefore, this macrocosmic consciousness at the end of history would be trying to introduce dissonance and conflict and differentiation so as to see what types of new forms and structures might arise, because that being is desperately in need of some kind of change. Okay, that being would be facing suicidal nihilism. And in that case, we would have to save God. Okay, God would need us to save her from suicidal despair. And the last thing that kind of a divine consciousness wants is perennialism, which is going to level everything and try to make everything seem as homogeneous as possible. That God would want discord and dynamic creative strife.